But today we're not only talking about private institutions because the University of Wisconsin has gotten in on the action with multiple green and white Free Palestine tents, identical tents that have been pitched right in front of the Memorial Union. Rick Essenberg joins me on the program to talk about it. Rick, we can't do anything, right? Because it's free speech. Free speech, free speech. Is it? In which case, I'm thinking of buying a much nicer tent myself to hang out and see if I can't counter protest.
Well, it's certainly free speech for a student to get up and express their opinion about Israel and Gaza. There is no free speech right, however, to occupy a part of campus. And the University of Wisconsin has made clear, and this does not violate the Constitution, it does not permit camping on university grounds except in designated camping areas or those areas which are approved by an administrator. And I don't know if that has happened here, but I think it has not, because the chancellor said that they would not tolerate camping on campus. So, yes, if students want to, consistent with whatever reasonable time, place, and manner regulations are in place, express their opinions on Gaza, they can do it. But no, we do not have the constitutional right to camp out on campus.
All right. So we don't have a constitutional right to camp out on campus. And I've checked and I've asked a couple of UW graduate students whom I know who get, communication from the administration. Has there been a rule change? And the answer, at least according to them, is no, there has not been a rule change since Thursday when the UW put out, hey, we're not going to tolerate camping. But the tents have gone up. So we are going to see how far they'll let it go. Is mobbing students on their way to class or lab, is that free speech?
Well, no, you cannot threaten students. You cannot interfere with their use of the campus. And so, while we always point out that it's not violence, it's not a threat for you to be exposed to an opinion you disagree with, it becomes something different if there's some type of sufficiently aggressive action taken by protesters against students who are simply trying to go to class. And if that's something that we see here, that's going to be a problem as well, or ought to be a problem. The university is clear about that.
Well, so far UW, this just started today, so we're not sure what it ultimately is going to become of it. It could escalate, maybe it doesn't, but it has escalated on other campuses with students being, disallowed simply because they're being threatened by a mob. Does that qualify as sufficiently aggressive to mob someone and force them to walk through the mob or with the mob in order to get into a building, or a professor being blocked from getting to, from point A to point B because of that same angry mob? Will that be defined as aggressive?
Well, you have something under First Amendment law called a true threat, right? And if somebody makes a true threat, something that you might reasonably assume that they are about to take action against you, physical action against you, that's not permitted. There's also a concept called fighting words. So imagine that somebody comes up to you, stands 2 inches from your face, and screams an ethnic slur that's applicable to you into your face. Those are probably fighting words, and those would not be permitted. You mentioned blocking people from going into buildings. You can't block people from going into buildings. That's disorderly conduct. The problem here is that it's one thing for students to want to express their opinion, as puerile and ridiculous as these opinions might be, and they are puerile and ridiculous. They can express them, but what they can't do is choose to express them in a way that interferes with the legitimate rights of others to be free from threats, not to be subjected to provocative fighting words. And again, that's a very narrow category. It's not simply an opinion you don't like, or to be blocked from themselves using, the university and its facilities for the purposes that they're intending.
Sure. So all of this, I mean, this is kind of common sense. I want you to walk people through the common sense because eventually, you will see nothing happen at some places. I'm pleased to see that Georgia State Patrol got rowdy, got a little spunky over the weekend. But at the same time, you're seeing essentially at the higher level institutions, I guess we call them the Ivies. The Ivies seem to be, comfortable tolerating a lot of this. How about on the private school campuses? Because the First Amendment doesn't apply on the private school campuses. The First Amendment is about government. So on private school campuses, say at Marquette, what would the students' rights be on both sides? Would the students be permitted to even protest? And would the students who were being blocked have any claim?
Well, private schools are not subject to the First Amendment. They don't have to permit any protest at all if they don't want to, and not all schools would. But most major universities, certainly schools like Columbia and Princeton and Marquette, even for that matter, extend some measure of academic freedom to their students. Now, how academic freedom compares to the First Amendment is a complicated question. Like, we litigated a whole case about that involving a guy named John McAdams a few years ago who Marquette tried to fire. We won that case. But students are going to have, not because of the First Amendment, but because the university promised them probably some measure of freedom of expression, but that's only because of the commitment that the university itself has made. And again, I think under most concepts of academic freedom, you wouldn't have the right to camp out, occupy spaces, interfere with students coming to and from class, all the things that we just talked about.
So it's still, contractually or through the Constitution, this is supposed to be balanced. We're supposed to have a balancing act between people who want to protest and people who have the right to be unmolested in their attempts to go to class, go to the store, because we see this occupation mentality. We will occupy the interstate. We will occupy on and off ramps. We will block traffic. We will surround areas. And by and large, if you decide to do that, at least, from about 2015 to now, you're not met with much resistance. With the idea, being that one group can occupy and the other group can't. And so how do we get back, how do we get back to that balance where the Jewish students of the University of Wisconsin or Columbia or MIT or whatever, or any student, would feel as comfortable expressing themselves as somebody who wants to globalize the Intifada and reclaim the swastika is?
Well, I think the problem here is that these college administrators believe that all the pressure comes from one side. Like, they have to be concerned about reaction from their left, but never from their right. And so what they need to understand is that when you come and you pitch tents and you occupy someplace, or you block access to a facility, or you block a road, it's not about communication, right? Communication is me attempting to persuade you that my position is right and I have a right to do that. But blocking a road, or blocking entrance into an airport or to a building on campus, is an assertion of power. It is, we are going to physically exercise power over you by preventing you from doing something that you have a right to do. That's not protected. And when universities ignore that, when they say, well, it's just okay because we don't want to create a bad.
You broke up there a little bit. Rick, you broke up there just a little bit.
Right. When universities ignore this and they say that, we don't want to do anything, even though we can, because it will look bad for us to arrest these students or to discipline them in some way, they're really granting license to this type of thing. They're not protecting discourse. They're not protecting speech. They're protecting the private exercise of power. And they ought not to do that. It really runs contrary to everything that the university is supposed to do.
So I'm going to ask a question, and I'm not sure that this has an easy answer. But I like how you put that. They are actually protecting the private exercise of power, not speech. That's what you see when universities cave or institutions cave or police departments cave. They are essentially greenlighting the private exercise of power. If I am someone in that environment, and I'm thinking back to the guy in the Mini Cooper who made the mistake of driving through a protest in downtown Madison, the protest that resulted in the Hague statue being tossed into the lake and then the city county building being lit on fire. He was dragged out of his car and beaten. What if he instead had just simply kept rolling through, maybe knocked a couple of people over because he was in fear of his life? You know, that's the question is, when people are put into that position, when they're confronted that way by a mob of people trying to exercise private power, where does self-defense come in if they feel as if they are trapped and cannot get out?
Well, you know, there's a legal, you know, answer to that question that has to do with, you know, whether it was reasonable to expect that, you know, you were in imminent danger. And there's also the practical answer, right? When people feel that they're under threat, most of us, thank God, are not lawyers. And, you know, we don't sort of go through a legal calculus. We act to protect ourselves. And so when you allow this type of thing to get out of hand, where you don't have reasonable time, place, and manner regulations, which you're entitled to do under the First Amendment, when you allow things in the name of speech that are not speech, like blocking roads or blocking entries to buildings or camping out on the library mall, you're creating a chaotic situation which can deteriorate, in which, you know, people can find themselves in the position of this Mini Cooper driver, and, you know, he's going to or she's going to do what is needed for self-protection, and this is something this is kind of a spiral that we ought not to let get started in the first place. So, you know, sure, let the students speak, let them express their disgusting opinions, but you know, they got to do it in a way which doesn't interfere with the rights of others to use it.
Yeah, it would be simple as well to make sure this happens. But when it comes to the left, they get that private exercise of power, and when it comes to the right, they're the ones who sometimes get to be mobbed, terrified, and sometimes terrified into making a decision that ultimately gets them wound up charged. Because they should have never been put in that position in the first place, because the government shouldn't have put them in that position in the first place. I appreciate the time. Very, very much so. Thanks, Rick. I appreciate it.